All right. Welcome to this episode of Tech Talks. My name is Inbar Preiss. I'm a regulation correspondent at DL News, and we're joined by a special guest today that's going to help us unpack our keyword for today, which is infrastructures. And this is Holger Koether. I will give you a little bit more of an introduction to him in a moment. But first, um, it's an interesting time to talk about infrastructures because there's so many challenges and opportunities and changes taking place in the kind of infrastructures that we're talking about when we speak about technology, finance, and the blockchain industry. So on one hand, we have crypto and DeFi ecosystems, which are evolving very quickly, and developers are building layers on top of existing protocols to offer different kinds of uses and make the existing networks more efficient. And on the other hand, we have the more traditional players. For example, Wall Street giants are piling into crypto assets. Governments are racing to develop CBDCs or central bank digital currencies. And then there's financial institutions also looking to tokenize financial assets, and all of this in hopes of revamping the financial system. And in the background, all of these different groups are working sometimes together, sometimes in silos, to lay down infrastructures that can connect users and allow for interoperability. And this is also happening as more money is flowing into these industries and into the notion of tokenization and the potential that it has. And one other, thing that we need to consider is that regulators and policymakers are also following along and trying to direct and mold these trends into a certain direction. So with that little introduction, these are the kind of overarching themes that we'll discuss, and Holger is going to be able to give us so much more depth and expertise. And Holger, you're a member of the board of advisors for the IOTA Foundation, where you were also formerly an executive director for market adoption. And currently you're working also as a co-founder of the decentralized infrastructure platform HAVN. And you've also come from, many years of experience holding senior roles in major global tech providers like Siemens and Atos. So I hope I covered a little bit of your background, but I would love to hear a little bit more from you if you could give us a bit more insights into the work that you're working on now and what brought you to where you are.
Yeah, thank you very much, Inbar, for the invite. And of course, thank you, ValidVent, for organizing the whole series together with DL News. It's a pleasure to be here. Yeah, I have a background in enterprise IT. My name is Holger Koether. I'm from Germany. I worked 10 years at Siemens, 7 years at Atos, was the CTO for the Telefonica account at Atos in the past 2 years. And then it drew me towards crypto because I found it quite interesting what the new tech can provide in a decentralized manner without centralized sources of truth, but how we come to a consensus in decentralized systems. And then I started to work at the IOTA Foundation. I started to build up the market adoption department together with my colleague Regine. We built it up to like 40, 50 people, persons to talk to corporates, multinational organizations, and also understand how their strategic challenge looks like when they look at blockchain adoption. So which aspects of blockchain are relevant for them? Where does blockchain sit in their technology stack of services and tools and systems, what they provide to the customer? What do they expect from blockchain? And with this, we talk to, I would say, like 200 to 300 multinational corporations, understand their strategy, but also understand their hurdles, their points of pain. And this brought us then to the topic to say, how can we streamline this? Because we looked at the market, and even after we look at the market in 2022, it probably became even like more fractured than in 2027. And the user experience maybe even got worse because we're not only talking about how do I connect to Bitcoin, how do I connect to Ethereum, but now we are talking about how do I connect to a multitude of hundreds different chains, and how do I transfer liquidity, digital assets, and so on between all of these chains, and what does need to work in the background to actually make this seamlessly happen. And this is a topic which was always quite fascinating to us, and where we saw also the challenges, and then we saw, hey, there's a lot of potential to really start to streamline this process around customer success from the development of the chain, over the launch of the chain, over the infrastructure part, over populating it with users. And we saw corporates were like struggling with this and projects were struggling with this. And then we said, all right, let's create a shortcut for the companies. And then we founded our own company to streamline exactly that. Yeah.
And maybe let's start with the very basics. When I say infrastructure, when you talk about infrastructure, what exactly do you mean? What does it mean to you in your work?
Infrastructure is essentially what is happening when you have your MetaMask application installed in your browser, when you are trying to transfer some tokens. And the question is, what is happening now? So where does your MetaMask connect? No? How can you ensure that when 1,000 or 1 million or 100 million MetaMask users are connecting or want to transfer, that they're not getting a timeout, or that they actually can transfer and that the system is available and that it's also high performant and responsive. And essentially, this is what is infrastructure handling in the background, like taking those requests from customers, making sure that those customers can be executed on the blockchain, and then also providing all the different tools for projects so that they can really focus on building their own application. There are a number of blockchain tools which you would normally need when you're building an application, which is like a block explorer. So you need to have a block explorer when you want to see what's going on in the blockchain. You need to have what is called an indexer. So when you're writing millions of data records to the blockchain, then you need a way to understand fast what's going on. And if a user really has like a certain amount of tokens or has an NFT, for example, in the wallet, and if you want to get the status directly from the blockchain, it's typically quite slow. So you need some sort of caching and acceleration in the middle, where you say, what happens if not 100, but 1,000 people are using this, if 10,000 people are using it at the same time? And then essentially provide all of these tools that there is a scalable model in the background that you can start to rely on all of these things as a project out of the box. So that when you're getting started as a project, you do not need to think, should I start my own chain? How do I set up my own chain or my own blockchain? What type of component do I need to install? Do I have to get up at 3 o'clock in the night when the protocol is making a change or when there's an outage? No, normally you do not want this. You want to focus on your specific aspect where you are really good, where your IP lies, where your knowledge lies, and everything what is essentially out of your primary scope of work, you try to outtask it to somebody, to a provider who does nothing else than this. So professionals who have streamlined this whole process and they can provide it way better than if you would only install it by yourself, or if you would try to install it on an AWS or Google or Microsoft data center maybe, but you need a professional to really make it scalable and bring your application to 1 million users.
So infrastructures have existed, for a very long time. We won't get historical, but of course, when it comes to, financial and tech provider infrastructures, those have existed for a while. So what does blockchain bring into that mix? What kind of opportunities and on the other hand, what challenges does blockchain bring?
Yeah, blockchain brings like a myriad of new opportunities. Like when we're looking at the DeFi system and we are also looking at the MiCA regulation, and now how traditional corporates and like banks, for example, they're looking towards blockchain when there's a discussion, should the stock market also trade 24/7, maybe like the crypto exchanges? We also see large traditional providers or like banks or Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, and so on, also buying crypto companies. We see Visa adopting stable coins, also buying stablecoin companies. So we are seeing that the adoption is definitely like accelerating, that the traditional companies, they're also starting to look towards it. And I think this is like also the biggest change compared to 2017, 2018, 2019, because when we started in 17, 18, 19, there weren't like a lot of infrastructure providers. And this was the time where Consensus started to found Alchemy because they also saw this doesn't scale if you don't put a professional team which makes it scalable behind it. This was the time where Infura was born to accelerate the whole Ethereum ecosystem. So Infura is also an infrastructure provider, one of the first infrastructure providers for Ethereum, really on a large scale. Alchemy is very similar. And we are seeing this acceleration towards a professional market and also towards a market segmentation now rapidly accelerating. And like 5 years ago or 6 or 7 years ago, it started with a couple of providers, and now we are already like in a very, very niche area of providers where we are talking about very small specific blockchain aspects. For example, like calculating the state of a smart contract or calculating several state iterations. That's essentially what the smart contract is doing, as a state iteration. And then we are seeing this, that there's like computational capability offered as an infrastructure service just to calculate how a certain smart contract executed. So we are already in an area where we talk about setup of infrastructure, blockchain nodes, but also then about staking infrastructure, where you can provide your tokens to create more security in the system, towards various like niche provisions. So the whole infrastructure area is absolutely accelerating because blockchain is starting to arrive more and more in the commodity. And a commodity essentially means that you can buy it as a turnkey solution. You do not need to invent it by yourself. You don't need to compile a node software, for example, but essentially it's a turnkey solution. It results in the end for the project in a make or buy decision. Should I create this by myself, or should I buy it from a provider, to have it professionally operated? And this is rapidly accelerating. Like also the purchases in the blockchain space in 2023, 2024 from traditional companies, it's rapidly picking up now. So infrastructure is playing a great part in creating a professional and a very smooth experience to integrate blockchain into today's business models, so that really also scales with today's economy.
Right. So you're talking about how infrastructure providers, there's this trend of traditional players seeing more and more interest in blockchain infrastructure providers. Are there any kind of trends within that trend that you're looking to see? Are there certain maybe infrastructure providers which might be more attractive to financial institutions? And what would make them more attractive, or what would make a collaboration successful?
That there are some infrastructure providers which are also catering towards the needs of the enterprise sector. We are also very much catering for that with SPYCE.5, but there's also like a Kaleido, for example. There's CV, so there's a number of providers which are very much focused on the enterprise space, and they provide like additional features like secure connects, where nobody can, let's say, even get access to a certain chain or to a certain endpoint. So it's like dedicated endpoints, it's dedicated secure key management, because like, of course, the organizations, the enterprises, they want to do it on a larger scale. So it needs to be absolutely watertight. And as it's arriving in the enterprise space, also the tools and utilities, they're catering towards the need of this enterprise space. Single sign-on, integration into the directory of the corporate, getting data from the corporate into the blockchain, making sure, like, for example, there's something which is called a validator-based Oracle, where you can like directly move data from the organization into the chain so that the organization can work directly in the chain. There are also new requirements to make a chain completely private, or to equip an own chain with a KYC, so like a know your customer functionality, which is like required for a lot of like new use cases. So this is starting to be tested also on a European Union level. For example, when you want to start to tokenize state bonds, or you want to tokenize certain digital assets, or like stock exchange shares. So essentially everything where in a traditional organization, you would also need to go to a notary or provide an identity, who you are, why are you buying, or what are you buying, and that you are really you. And these models are starting to be like transitioned into the digital space because, of course, blockchain provides this additional secure layer, security to, but also then the privacy to tokenize those assets in a private chain. But for this, of course, it needs to be like compatible to the current regulation. And this is now what is rapidly accelerating. So the tech is there, the regulation is there, and now we are seeing this rapid integration into services.
So maybe following this kind of issue, do you expect to see a lot of mergers and acquisitions? I know you already mentioned a few examples of companies starting to work together, but what do you expect to see as financial institutions are looking to achieve more of these goals?
I think a lot of custody providers will be bought by larger banks simply because banks have like a self-interest to own the access to the wallet. For them, it's a new business model. The same way like you buy a stock, for example, through your banking app, the banks are also positioning themselves to buy crypto directly through the app. And some of the neobanks like N26, like here in Germany, they're already doing this. Yeah, and so I expect like a lot more organizations starting to buy either companies which have, for example, stablecoin experience, what is now happening with the whole CBDC like initiatives which are ongoing, but it's also for infrastructure management, how to provide a secure infrastructure and a secure wallet system for the bank's customers. And we've seen this like when PayPal started to enter the crypto space. Um, they acquired Curve, which is like a large financial asset provider. Then we saw Visa, they acquired Tala, MasterCard, they acquired CipherTrace, JP Morgan, they acquired Ren, Google acquired BitPay to say, hey, you can also pay with crypto. So the companies, they are taking these shortcuts with organizations and with startups. This is like also like a usual model, that you create a startup with a certain solution, a turnkey solution, and then you're being bought by a company which is simply looking to extend into the space and then is taking essentially a shortcut to get knowledge in that space very rapidly when they see it unfolding.
Yeah, it's really fascinating to watch all of these acquisitions, really materialize. Are there specific maybe banks or companies that you're watching when it comes to this?
Not specifically, but what I'm seeing is when you watch the news that the impact of those large collaborations, they're becoming more and more. Like before that, you only saw small collaborate, like a small company working together with another small company. And now we are really seeing like these big blockchain collaborations, not only when you are buying like organizations buying startups or organizations, I don't know, sometimes also like doing a merger, but we are seeing it like on Aptos and Microsoft level. For example, they're collaborating how blockchains can secure like the next generation of AI and what type of digital model went into the large language models for AI learning. Like Casper Labs is doing something similar with IBM. And I think this is now where we are seeing, we always talk about the cake and the size of the cake and how the cake is growing. But now we are seeing that the cake is like actively being eaten by companies with Aptos, which secured, I think, 250 or 300 million in funding. Microsoft, billion-dollar player. So the cake is being eaten at the moment, like with these large companies, like really nailing it down how blockchain adoption will look like over the next months and years.
And I'd love to hear what you think drives this trend. Of course, there's the bull market aspect, which finally this year, I think the industry was very happy to see a turn in the markets. But then also there's an increasing maybe fascination and will for both banks and other financial institutions to be part of this tokenization trend where financial instruments are having their tokenized representation on a blockchain or other decentralized ledgers. Are those the kinds of trends that are leading these kinds of acquisitions? Are there other trends that are relevant?
There's a large trend for real-world asset tokenization, and this is also one of the largest drivers currently in the sector for what is always called the real-world adoption. So something which is anchored in the real world. It's not just like a virtual, like crypto construct, like in DeFi, for example, where there's a lot of speculation involved, but this is now about the tokenization. And this tokenization is happening because blockchain provides certain aspects with regards to additional security, but especially with automation. So you can start to automate processes which were impossible before because you did not have this trust level, or because you need to rely on a certain company to do it for you. But then, of course, this introduces like a single point of failure again. But now we are seeing companies working on real-world asset tokenization, they're tokenizing it on the chain, then becomes a virtual good. And when the regulation, and this is why it's so important that we have the regulatory aspects, and why I'm also quite happy that we have MiCA and like all the other initiatives. When you look at US, they're also now getting, I would call it getting inspired by MiCA. Taiwan is getting very much inspired by the European regulation progress. Because like what it ultimately enables is automation. And when we only like think about it, like tokenizing a building, tokenizing another good, what would be involved in manual steps? I would go to the notary, like, but you cannot send like 100 people or 1,000 or 10,000 people to the notary in the end. So how do you shortcut towards an automated process which guarantees the security, which guarantees like lower costs, lower risk, because this is normally what the companies are looking for. How do I decrease my cost? How do I decrease my risk? Or how do I increase my margin essentially? And blockchain automation is great, especially with real world assets and tokenization, because it like hits this nail on the head. Now, like you have like a tamper-proof ledger with the blockchain where it's absolutely clear who owns what at which time. Because this is what blockchain is really good to give you this information real time. And then it happens in a decentralized system. It's secure. It can be traced back to an origin because you can attach signatures also to it. And when we're looking at the world in where with AI, we can start to create trillions of artificial data points in our in our world, then also the value of a real data set is starting to become like actually valuable. And but you need to prove that it's a real data set. And so I think this is like this big trend where blockchain is also sort of like the catch up for AI, because there was a long time this question, what is blockchain now actually good for? Where is now actually used, like for the last 3 or 4 years, and now we are seeing, all right, it makes sense together with AI, but the big trend is like really also with automation, real world asset tokenization, bonds, stock exchange, and then stocks. And this leads to then new trends, because when we can start to tokenize bonds as well, then also I, as a private person, I have suddenly like a very easy way of just going out, putting money into crypto when I know it's secured by a real bond, not by a real tokenized regulatory compliant asset. And it suddenly makes the whole crypto narrative much more attractive, because it's not shady anymore. If I require money, maybe I can even go into the crypto system and I can borrow money. Maybe it's even cheaper than if I borrow from my bank with the same security. So I think this is a trend which we will also see in the future, that crypto will become like cheaper than traditional lending and borrowing mechanisms. And also that maybe, this is a bit in discussion, that when we are seeing staking rewards on Ethereum, so Ethereum works that you can put up a validator, and a validator is essentially like a node which is checking if all those Ethereum transactions are correct. But you need to stake, so you need to put 32 Ethereum on this validator, because if you validate the blockchain wrongly, or you modify the software to try to be a malicious actor, then you also get slashed. And slash means like you lose a bit of these 32K Ether. But with this, you have like also like skin in the game.
So we were talking also about real world assets and tokenization. How do you think that regulations like MiCA, or markets in crypto assets in Europe, which is maybe just for listeners to give a little bit of background, is the regulation which is starting to be implemented from this summer over the course of the coming years for both stablecoin issuers and platforms and institutions handling crypto assets. So, for example, crypto asset service providers will need to adhere to higher standards. And part of this is also that existing banks or e-money institutions, they have kind of easier time complying with MiCA. And in a way that makes it easier for them to handle crypto. So do you think that a regulation like MiCA makes the trend of tokenization and these acquisitions and entrance into the crypto asset market easier for financial institutions in Europe?
I think it makes it tremendously easier, because with the regulation, we also have essentially established a standard by which we can start to compare different models in the market. Is it a governance token? Is it a security token? Is it a utility token? We had this categorization before, but it was mainly done by private institutions, universities like the Frankfurt School of Business and Finance, for example. They had a larger initiative around this. But to have this on a European Union government state level, I think is absolutely key to bring it into the mass adoption and into the markets.
And what do you expect to see over the coming 5 years in Europe as these laws come into place?
A lot more organizations which have now the security to really go into blockchain. When we worked at the IOTA Foundation, there was like a large challenge, I would call it, with organizations going towards blockchain, which is that blockchain is a public system. And whenever they write something on the blockchain, they always run into the risk of metadata analysis. So you can imagine this, like you're having a wallet, let's say in Germany, there's another wallet in, I don't know, the UK or the US. And if somehow you can see that traffic is picking up on a certain wallet and you can understand that this wallet belongs to a certain industry or a certain like organization. Let's say it's a BMW wallet, and suddenly traffic in this BMW wallet or in the wallets start to increase. We can start to deduct like, hey, BMW is maybe doing something. And this is like a huge risk what companies are quite risk aware and why they would prefer to stay in a private space or somehow obfuscate what is happening on the blockchain by either just writing out hashes or completely setting up on a private system or in a private chain. I expect that a lot more organizations are starting to adopt the MiCA regulation because it gives them this clarity to go into the market. It describes what they can do, what they cannot do, and it also gives them like a clear model how they can launch a certain token aspect or like a tokenization aspect. And until now, this was all unclear, but now the playing field is there, the rules are there, and so now the players can enter the field and they can start to populate this field and also then bring it into mainstream adoption.
Yes, and I think that is something that Europe has been boasting about. And as you mentioned, I think earlier in our conversation, that other jurisdictions are also being inspired and hoping to follow along. So we'll see how far the US gets with with their potential regulations, and other parts of the world as well. And maybe we can circle back to what you started speaking about as well, which is just the interesting features of blockchain and for example, staking is something that is new compared to for or even in the life cycle, I guess, of crypto assets. It was introduced a little bit later on. So what is the opportunities when it comes to staking, and what is the interest for both retail and maybe wholesale investors in crypto?
Yeah, staking essentially means that you are using your money to validate parts of the network. So when you have acquired certain tokens, you put them onto a validator, and then your tokens give the validator a certain weight for his voice in the network to decide what is true or what is false in transactions happening on the network. And we are seeing, well, staking, we have seen this over the past years, but something that is quite interesting now is that we are seeing new models, also with the growth of blockchain, because we're starting to have more and more blockchains in itself. So not only the underlying blockchain, but blockchains on a blockchain, then which is called like a layer 2 solution because it's not the underlying layer 1, but a layer on top of it. And when you add another layer on top of it, then this is already called like a layer 3 blockchain. And essentially, the layer 3 blockchain writes its data, it calculates the data, and it writes a summary onto the layer 2 blockchain. The layer 2 blockchain also does the same. It accumulates some blocks and it writes a summary onto the layer 1 blockchain. And this is all happening because the block space, so the amount of transactions which can be handled by the layer 1 blockchain, at least on Ethereum, is starting to get very scarce. You can always see this when the rates are hiking up in Ethereum. So we are starting to have layer 2 blockchains for better scalability, because then there's a new tech on top of it, not just writes back on Ethereum, but suddenly there's like new capacity which can be used. The big problem is now that we have hundreds of these layer 2 chains already on Ethereum. And when you look how they are secured, then they are secured by, I don't know, like a 5 validator set normally. There are also like rollups, which is something little bit like different. There you have a provider calculating everything, but normally you have like a validator set of 5 or 7 or 10 or 21 like validators. They're looking at everything what's happening in the blockchain. They're validating it, and if somebody's acting maliciously, then they slash him or they decrease his funds or they don't let his transaction go through. And now the problem is that this was a long explanation, but the problem out of this is now that we have like hundreds of layer 2 chains, and those layer 2 chains, they often exist like in a very small consortium. And often this consortium was put up by an operator of this layer 2 chain. But of course, this goes against this decentralized approach from blockchain, where you have like a decentralized model. Everybody owns a little bit, everybody validates a little bit. And now we have like liquidity and value. So we have like 50 million in this blockchain, 100 million in this blockchain. But at the same time, you have 3 validators or 5 validators, which are all funded by the same wallet. So this means like the person who set this up could easily do a rug pull. They pull out these 50 million and they are never seen again. And this is now where new infrastructure and staking mechanisms are coming in. So when you stake your Ethereum, for example, you get something back, which is called an SETH or an STETH, like a for staked Ethereum. It's a token that you have staked something and you can exchange it for your Ethereum again. And now what we are seeing is called restaking. So you take this token, you stake it again, because let's say you have 100 Ethereum, get 100 staked Ethereum, you put them on a validator. It's a proof that you own the original Ethereum, so you have a voice in the network because you have a commercial interest. And then you have the staked Ethereum on these small layer 2 chains. And essentially, this is also like what Eigenlayer and now some new organizations are doing. They're saying, wait, don't rely on these 5 validators. We are going to put in ours, and in addition, we are going to check if something is happening or not. And they're using then the funds of the users, which is of course like again billions of dollars. So there's like I think 10, 12 billion now in Eigenlayer, which is like a whole new security model, because suddenly you don't rely on the one anonymous guy who maybe funded all of these wallets, but you're relying, or yeah, you're safe because millions of people have staked their Ethereum towards your security model.
So yeah, there's a lot of innovations here. And I think, staking has slowly permeated into maybe the more regulatory conversations, and institutions are kind of looking more into understanding this technology. Are you able to maybe share any impressions that not necessarily regulators, but maybe people more from the traditional financial side, what impressions do they have on innovations like eigenlayers?
They are fascinated by it, and they are seeing how they can use it. Like this is like the biggest trend which I've seen like in the past, like, or I would say like even 7 years. Like every company is looking into blockchain the same way. Like every company is now looking, since the ChatGPT success, every company is looking into AI. It has pivoted also a bit towards AI. But this aspect to do seamless trade, to have the security of the blockchain, it's natively interesting for every company. So they are looking at it. There's still this argument that you could do 99% of the cases, maybe even without a blockchain and just with a Web2 solution. This then also depends on the company. But 1% of all the global business cases is still quite a lot if you think about global adoption and the normal industry market cap. So I'm also like always stating blockchain, it doesn't always make sense, but where it makes sense, it's such a powerful tool that you can start to develop a whole new set of business models around it. And blockchain is a team game. So normally the traditional corporates, they have a bit of a struggle to think, what happens if I open this up? If suddenly the customer can do something else, he could easily go to a competitor. Yes, okay, he could also do this now, but in a blockchain system, it's normally more geared towards open source, that you can also get your data out and so on. So it's like easier to switch to an opponent or to a competitor. And this is like why a lot of corporates are also quite hesitant to say, how can I secure the loyalty of my customers, that they are not just wandering off? And this is what a lot of organizations, they are like struggling with, to adopt this Web3 methodology into their current like Web2 business model. So they actively need to think about, how do I involve the user? How do I give him ownership of something, maybe what he creates, his data, his art, his, I don't know, like a certain amount of the company shares or of the company earnings, which would also be deducted to him as a creator in this ecosystem. And these are like completely new terms and also new business models for traditional companies because they have been working completely centralized. Most of the large companies, they make like 80% of their revenue, like it's a Pareto principle now, but 80% of the company with like of the revenue with 20% of their customers or with their top 10 or top 20 customers. So they also need to like rethink how can this be adopted towards Web3. So it's interesting for them. Most of the use cases, I also have to say, which we have seen do not make any sense, but where they make sense on such a global scale, like when you also think about the whole DePIN infrastructure, so decentralized physical infrastructure, that physical infrastructure is just becoming a lot more resilient because a lot more people are operating it, they're getting incentivized for it. And this is like how we can build like this more connected world where we do not have single intermediaries, but where essentially we have like a completely seamless system where everybody can simply transact with each other and then also at one point offer services and so on through the system. So like a very granular transaction-based system fully geared towards automation where literally like most of the stuff is just in the end automated. Payments, service offers, and everybody can globally bid onto it. And I think this is like this very strong direction we are heading towards.
Yeah. And blockchain protocol developers have a few choices that they need to consider when developing. And I'd love to hear a little bit from you about how people make these choices. For example, does a protocol need a token, and why would they need a token? Or should a blockchain be public or private? Could you maybe talk us through the decision-making process when it comes to which features come to the right blockchain and who do they serve?
Yeah, regarding the token, usually it's baked into some sort of governance model, which is like the most lightweight approach. So you have the token is freely distributed, and then people like distributed towards interested people who have joined a certain ecosystem very early onwards. Then it's distributed, and then they can start to vote on certain features. This is like a typical governance token. But from like an enterprise or organizational point of view, I have to say like it depends because in the end the token needs a utility. By startups, the token is often used for fundraising, also for VCs, because it provides this, what I talked about before, this automated vehicle, and we have standard agreements like this SAFT agreements, a simple agreement for future token purchases is the SAFT agreement globally wide accepted, and it's a very unbureaucratic way to acquire tokens. And when compared to getting a stake in a company, which involves an equity investment, because you would need to go to the notary, you need to participate in shareholder meetings, and so on. Just buying the token, you can do it very easy, so a lot less bureaucracy. And this also goes vice versa now for the projects and for the organizations trying to launch or wanting to launch on the blockchain. So what do you want to launch on the blockchain? Is it essentially an enhanced model of your current business model? Do you want to have an additional security aspect? Do you want to have an additional privacy aspect? Do you want to make it decentralized for a new group of users? Does it require do you want to open it up for certain investments or tokenization of digital assets? So it always depends a bit if you really require a token or not. Normally you do not, but it makes sense when it comes about voting, fundraising, or if your business model is specifically dedicated towards creating a token and then using the token of giving the owners of the token a certain share of your revenue, for example, the same way like it would work in a AG or like in a stock market company.
Right. Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. And you're also in the process of launching a token with your protocol, right?
Yeah, correct. Like with HAVN, we are focusing on the interoperability because with all these 100 chains, we also have the problem that the liquidity is now so the money in those chains is essentially getting trapped in all these small silos. And it's quite hard when you're on this layer 3, like here on top somewhere on a blockchain network. to move your funds to another blockchain network. And when we have like in the same technology stack, it typically works quite well. But if you want to go from a one layer 2 or layer 3 to another layer 3, typically you have to go from layer 3 to the layer 2 to the layer 1. Then you have to bridge it to another network. Then you have to go back up to the next layer 2 and to the next layer 3. So that's what I said in the beginning, that the whole user experience is a lot more fractured or like quite worse than it was 5 years ago. Because 5 years ago, we had, I don't know, like 50 top chains, and you just connected to these 50 top chains. And that was it. There was either a bridge or not, no? But it was very easy. And now you need to bridge your tokens through several hubs. So it got, in the end, a lot more complicated. And with Haven, we are focusing on creating the infrastructure for organizations which want to get started, but also then directly connect them with a bridge that they can launch their own token. They can bridge it out to other ecosystems. So they have the infrastructure. When they incentivize their community, or when they market it to their community, they could even get the whole setup, their own chain, completely for free. And we are seeing also this trend that certain dApps, especially like also exchanges, they want to launch on their own chain. And so I would even like predict that the banks are want to launch on their own chain, and that every bank will have their own chain in the future, simply because they have the control over it. They do not run into any of those typical Ethereum exploits, which is called, for example, like a minor extractable value, MEV. If some of the viewers have already heard it, this is essentially when in Ethereum or in a blockchain block, this blocks needs to be like built. So what transactions are in the block, and the person or the provider who like builds this block, he takes the transactions, and normally like from a big pool, and normally you would say you take the transactions which have the highest fee associated with it, because the provider is interested in getting the most fees of a certain crypto transaction. So this is the normal model. You take those transactions with the highest fees, you put them into the block, and then you send it off. It's the next block. And with MEV, it's like quite a malicious behavior, because essentially you're building the block in a way that you're positioning artificial sell or buy orders in this block, and you position a buy order or a sell order which has a higher price or a lower price than, let's say you want to buy Bitcoin for $63,000. And I would put in, if I would be a block producer, I could put in like a transaction which looks like if the Bitcoin price is not 63,000, but 63,100. And you pay me this premium, so you pay $100 in premium as part of your trade. And in the end, like I put you between like a buy and a sell position, and then I just like sell your stake off again. So, and then I make this $100, and you have paid these $100 in addition. And this is like what exchanges are quite keen on, I would say, not letting go through, because it's a direct customer advantage, it's a direct customer exploit. So the protocols launching like in DeFi, and I would expect then also with the banks, they want to provide a fair system which is resilient against exploits. And with this, of course, they want to build their own blocks. They want to make it as secure as possible. They might have some additional security requirements as well, what you can write to the blockchain. If certain transactions are getting preferred, we're also seeing WorldCoin launching their own chain, like the World Chain, which is also, I think, like a very nice idea, because WorldCoin is all about the real world users. So if you're like a real human, you know that your transaction will always get prioritized versus a machine transaction or an automated transaction. And so a lot of intrinsities are starting to be built in for business specific purposes in these systems.
You mentioned banks running their own chains. I think does JP Morgan has its own coin, JP coin. Is that on its own chain?
Oh, and I have to say I do not know if
Hey, Laura, this
If a
part
JP
because I
coin is
wasn't sure either. Um, thanks. But okay. Um, my other question, still cut. It seems to me like scalability and interoperability are the two biggest challenges when it comes to these kinds of infrastructures. What do you think? Is that a good an evaluation?
I think this is a great evaluation of the current sentiment in the space. Like when I was in Denver at ETH Denver, like Kiki was at the token 2049, and like the two overarching topics were really like liquidity, like how do we get this fractured liquidity or this liquidity which is like fractured across all of these chains? How can we get it bundled again, or how can we make it as interoperable as possible? And then, of course, for the user to improve the UX, also the interoperability is key. And this is also where like most of the solutions and a lot of the innovation is now going into. So we see also Chainlink with their ICCP protocol for interchain communication. We see fully decentralized protocols with layer 0, for example, where you can like even, you do not need to rely on layer 0 that they onboard your coin, but you can like directly add your coin to this bridge, completely automated. So all these interoperability protocols, they're starting to pick up, which is like a good thing. I think it's not there yet simply because it's not yet user-friendly enough and not enough chains are connected, but also what we are seeing with Coinbase, that they're saying, hey, when you launch on Coinbase or like on Base, like you get USDC out of the box for all of your chains and for all of your activities so that you can start to pay your contributors or like have a certain like stable coin with which you can start to buy services and with which you can start to interact in the system versus setting it up by yourself. So getting this extra kickstart by having additional infrastructure, having additional interoperability to really focus on your launch, focus on your meme token, focus on your business model, whatever you want to do, but don't spend hundreds of hours in setting up your own infrastructure. This is commodity now. Yeah.
Right. So we've spoken a little bit about decentralized protocols and the more institutional infrastructures for tokenization. And there's another level of infrastructures which I've been following, which is government-run blockchains. And for example, in Europe, I think they have put a substantial amount of work over the past 5 years to develop a blockchain for European infrastructure, for European services infrastructure. It's called EBSI, European Blockchain Services Infrastructure. And I think by the end of this month, it will become also a political entity that will see the rollout and production of this blockchain. So do you think that this is even necessary? Is this a step too far? Or do blockchains like this that come under the jurisdiction or a certain jurisdiction that has maybe interests in revamping its administration and in the long run, allowing maybe the private sector to also build on it? Do you think that this is a cause for celebration or concern?
I think it's a cause for celebration because in the end, it's baby steps towards adoption. And we have seen the MiCA regulation, which took quite a long time as accumulation of the 5 years before. And when we are starting to have standards in blockchain and in crypto asset management, the adoption, like the security and the trust into those systems is incredibly rising. We have seen it with EBSI. There are also some other formats like around the globe. EBSI initially was set up, so it's a PCP, a pre-commercial procurement, which is essentially like it was a test in 3 stages to say how can we establish a blockchain system in the European Union? How can we establish it for certain use cases like cross-border trade? Or cross-border payments, like there are a lot of packages coming from China, now with AliExpress or Temu and so on. For some of them, you need to pay a tax. And normally the people are going to the customs office, and then you have to pay, I don't know, €2 49 or 41 to tax to the customs office. But it involves somebody looking there, standing there with you for half an hour, unpacking the things, showing it to them. And in the end, they get like €2 41 tax or something. So, and this automation is essentially also what the governments are after. So if there's a certain import, export area, how can I automate the payments associated with that? How can I make them secure in the end? But also, how do I provide an infrastructure for businesses, for example, to do an audit trail or to do essentially like a logistics log to understand like like a digital product passport to understand where the product was produced, through which stages it went, and how was the product deprecated, like for a sustainable product passport. And in a globally connected world where we also have a lot more regulation, like in Germany, there's this great word, which is one of my most favorite German words. It's like the Lieferkettentransparenzgesetz, which essentially means like the
Translate.
delivery chain transparency law. When you're a company over 1,000 people and or like 3,000 and soon over 1,000 people, you have to show where your stuff is coming from. So you need to have transparency in your chain. But this puts a lot of hurdles on small and medium-sized companies because often they just do not know it or they have challenges with it to really document it. And for this, it's good when we have like providers or like a certain like government or like certain how to say regulatory structure which is put in place where you can just onboard automatically. So again, the more you automate, the better for the economy because it's a standardized process. Many people know how it's done. It's not complicated. It gives trust and it ensures that it ties into what everybody else is doing. And yes, at the moment it's baby steps, also with those different regulatory sandboxes which are coming up to understand how do we work with KYC in a blockchain, this know your customer, not that we have only accredited people in a blockchain, for example, trading stocks in a closed system or applying certain DeFi aspects. So it's baby steps, but I think it's necessary to get the confidence in the system and then also start to gradually open up the system, see what risks might be introduced, but also how it just scales versus traditional systems and what new types of business models without these central players are then suddenly possible.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see how these different things will develop. And maybe just for our last question, it was really interesting to hear about all these different aspects coming together from the corporate side, from the DeFi side, and now also from the government side. In the next 5 years, what maybe are your concerns, or if you have anything you're worried about when it comes to the development of your project or these infrastructures, and if there's anything that keeps you up at night, and on the other hand, what are the things that you're looking forward to and excited to work with in the future?
I'm quite excited about the regulatory aspect, but I also, of course, see the danger what at the moment the SEC is doing in the US. So they're trying to sue everyone who is not up on the tree at the count of three, essentially. I don't think this is the right approach. It needs a bit more of a like diverse approach to really like look into it and understand the benefits also for businesses. I think Europe is a bit faster with this, but they also started a lot earlier. I think it's also good that there are protocols like Polkadot, for example, who have like engaged very, very early with those regulatory aspects to say, hey, we are there, we want regulation, we want to do this compliant. How do we do this together? The IOTA Foundation is also a very strong promoter for regulatory activities and for input feedback. And then, of course, like also organizations like INATBA, but with I don't know, 180. Last time I checked, it was 180 companies like in INATBA. Maybe it's now more. Yeah, but giving the organizations which are working with crypto a voice, this is important because if it's just coming down, top down through Brussels, we have seen like also very like some cases where it can just go completely wrong, like this proof of work ban, for example, which was discussed, and it was there like this in the in the law, and then it was like changed last minute in order to facilitate. All right, it's not like all of the proof of work chain, but with a certain aspect. So, and these are the intrinsities where we just need the feedback from the space, and why I think these baby steps are not so bad because if something goes into effect. With an understanding which is not well suited with how the space actually ticks, it will create a lot more damage and a lot more complications, which just then lead to non-adoption in the end because the risks are getting too high that somebody might end up in jail with one leg if they're doing it in a certain way. So I'm quite excited with it. And over the next 5 years, I would think there's like a lot more adoption, regulation. I just hope it's not being overshot and that blockchain and crypto digital assets as a system for frictionless trade is really starting to become like a standard and that is being recognized. That is a global trend. It cannot be stopped. Also, what we are seeing with Bitcoin, that if people are trying to stop it, it starts to become a shadow economy and so on. So I think it's good that this danger is being seen and that it's being regulated in a way that we can work productively with it and that it creates new opportunities and how to say, streamlining for businesses to bring in services with less overhead so that they can really focus on their competitive edge and not worry about the tech or taxes or in the end anything else.
Brilliant. Well, on that note, I'd like to thank you so much for sharing all your expertise and insights during this conversation. I definitely learned a lot, and I hope viewers will as well. And also a big thank you to Validvent for organizing these conversations and these talks. So yeah, a big thank you, and I hope you still get to enjoy your evening.
Thank you very much for the invite, Inbar. Thank you also to Validvent again. And thank you to everyone who took the time to listen to this webcast. So thank you very much.
All right, see you.
Bye.
I will